midnight blankets the Ecuadorian Andes in a deep indigo that seems almost liquid, swallowing the world in silence. A winding dirt road snakes through the highland gloom, littered with abandoned crates and rusted farm equipment that glint like forgotten relics beneath the pale silver of a waning moon. A single amber lantern clings to the roadside, its feeble glow casting long, distorted shadows that ripple as the wind whispers through the pines. The only soundtrack is a distant owl's cry, punctuated by the creak of an old tree swaying in the night. In this place, a shiver traces the wind, a subtle omen that something has lingered too long. For decades, the mountain held a secret, a dark secret that would later be etched into the bloodiest pages of South American crime. By 1985, investigators were convinced that a single man could be responsible for more than 300 disappearances, each case a ghost that vanished without a trace. Who is the monster that could walk through a town, blend with the night, and leave only the echo of his absence behind? The answer, buried beneath the Andes' silent breath, waits to be uncovered. In the blistering early afternoon of 1948, the sun hammered the cracked adobe walls of Guaxinay, turning the streets of this rain-soaked town into a patchwork of mud and salt-crusted dirt. Inside a cramped kitchen, the stale scent of bread mingled with the distant rumble of traffic, while a broken radio tried, failing, to crackle through old boleros. The camera lingers on a child's small hand, gripping a torn picture frame of a family that no longer exists, the frame's edges frayed like the promise of a better life. The light, harsh and unfiltered, slices through peeling paint, throwing jagged shadows that dance across the floor as the boy watches the world with wide, unblinking eyes. Pedro Alonso López's early years were defined by poverty and absence. By the age of 5, his father had left, leaving his mother to shoulder rent and the weight of a son and a sister with no safety net. The household barely met its bills, and each evening, the mother would close the door with the weary knowledge that hope was a stranger in those rooms. Yet, even amid that bleakness, a young Pedro clutched a crumpled newspaper, its headline a distant echo of possibility, a fragile dream that would eventually twist into a nightmare. As the camera pulls back, the low-angle shot of the back alley reveals the boy's silhouette against the harsh light, his reflection flickering across the walls, peeling paint. The oppressive mood of that cramped home, filled with the hum of a radio that could not sing, foreshadows a mind that would later learn to listen to darker melodies. In this early afternoon, the seeds of a future terror were sown in the mud of Guaxinay, watered by poverty and a relentless sun that never softened. The cell was a black hole at twilight, the sun a dying ember in the Bogotá sky. A single overhead bulb sliced the dimness with a hard, white glare that left the walls of peeling Colombian flag posters in stark, unforgiving shadows. Inside, the air was cold and claustrophobic, punctuated by the low murmur of other inmates and the distant, metallic wail of a siren echoing through the concrete corridors. Pedro, at 16, felt the weight of that iron enclosure as if it were an extension of his own skull. In that suffocating darkness, he learned that fear could be a tool, that people were pages waiting to be turned. He watched, recorded, and memorized the cadence of their secrets. Within those walls, he plotted his first escape, a desperate leap that carved new paths into the night. Each successful break from the juvenile detention center was a lesson in deception and survival, a masterclass in slipping through the cracks of society. He forged a network of contacts, scavenged the black market for knowledge, and sharpened a grim intuition that could read the telltale tremors in a stranger's gait. The overhead bulb's harsh light became a symbol of the thin line between the safety of confinement and the void beyond. In the quiet moments between escapes, Pedro rehearsed the silence that would later shatter in a life of violence. When the day finally came to leave the prison walls, 1965, Pedro did not step out as a child but as a predator, his mind a mapped labyrinth of terror. He had traded the clang of bars for the cold certainty of a future in darkness. The twilight outside the cell flickered like a dying candle, echoing the faintest hope of daylight. Yet, within that dim glow, the first ember of a killing fire ignited. The siren's far-off howl became the soundtrack to his newfound freedom. A grim reminder that his first true act of murder would not just be an escalation. It would be the moment his world tilted irrevocably toward the abyss. The camera lingers on a tiny, tarnished locket that once belonged to a child, its silver edge gleaming in the dying light. The image dissolves into a wide shot of a coffee farm in Colombia, vines curling like green serpents toward the horizon. The Andes loom in the distance, their peaks swallowed by a twilight that casts long, bone-white shadows over the terraced fields. The sound is not of birds or distant cattle. It is the soft, mechanical breathing of the wind through the leaves, punctuated by the faraway crunch of boots on gravel. Here, between 1970 and 1984, a figure slipped through the rows, unseen, unnoticed, his presence only hinted at by the sudden chill that follows a breeze. The scene shifts to an Ecuadorian village at dusk. Lanterns sputter to life, casting a dim, artificial glow that flickers over weathered adobe walls. The camera cuts to a forest path where the silhouette of a man can be seen in the low light, his movements slow and deliberate. He lures young girls with promises of sweets or a ride, speaking in soft, coaxing tones that mask a predatory intent. The light from a passing car cuts through the darkness, illuminating the face of a child whose eyes widen in terror before the sound of her scream fades into the night. The only other noises are the distant cries of insects and the occasional thud of a boot, each echo reverberating like a warning that the village itself is not safe. In the next montage, a Peruvian jungle clearing becomes the stage. The camera pans from the rustling leaves to the sudden silhouette of López as he walks away from a ravine. The lighting shifts from the last warm rays of daylight to a cold twilight that turns the foliage into a sea of shadows. His method is chillingly consistent. A tight, constricting grip around a throat, a breathless hiss, and then a swift disposal of the body into a secluded ravine or an abandoned cave. The scene is devoid of any celebratory triumph. It is a quiet, ruthless act of violence that leaves behind nothing but the silence of a forest and the echo of the victim's final breath. The voiceover recaps the first confirmed murder in 1970, near the town of San Andres, a young girl who vanished on a school trip. The camera cuts to the desolate outskirts of Quito in 1984, where the last known victim, 14-year-old Lucia, disappears into the night. By that time, investigators estimate that López had claimed the lives of 300 innocent children, though the true number may forever remain buried in the unforgiving Andean earth. The montage ends with the camera pulling back to show a panorama of the Andes at night, the stars obscured by cloud. In the distance, the only sound is the distant, rhythmic thump of a boot, reminding us that even in the stillness, the past lingers, and the truth of this horror remains an echo in the dark. Night draped the Andes, the city skyline of Quito flickering like a distant constellation of street lamps. Inside a cramped police evidence room, the fluorescent lights hissed overhead, throwing a cold, unflattering glow across a stack of yellowed files labeled Colombian and Ecuador DM. The camera hovered above the detective's desk, then swooped in to reveal a tangle of yellow blotting paper, photographs of grim faces, and a whiteboard crowded with arrows, dates, and cryptic scribbles. The hum of the bulbs was a relentless metronome, punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren, an eerie soundtrack to the unfolding hunt. In 1985, a forensic pathologist in Quito first saw the pattern. The strangulation marks on several cold case victims were not random. They bore consistent pressure and angle, the same brutal precision found in the 1977 Bogota homicide and the 1980 Quito murder. Even more chilling was the discovery of local herbs, known to be used in traditional remedies, embedded in the throats of each victim. These botanical clues suggested a ritualistic element, a signature that could tie disparate murders together. The pathologist's handwritten note, slipped into a cold, unsealed envelope, would become the first crack in a mountain of silence. Across borders, the investigation grew like a spiderweb of missteps. Police departments from Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile exchanged thick stacks of cold handwritten reports, each page a brittle witness to a shared horror. But with no centralized database, the cases remained isolated islands of evidence, never overlapping, never converging. The weight of that disconnect was palpable in the room. Folders stacked to the ceiling, each one a story waiting to be told, each one a dead end for the detectives who held them. It was not until Detective Maria Rivas, an Ecuadorian officer with a reputation for refusing to be satisfied by incomplete answers, cross-checked DNA evidence from the 1977 Bogota case against the 1980 Quito murder that the puzzle began to fit. She ran the profiles, the genetic markers, the herb residue analysis through a chain of laboratories that spanned the continent. One thread, an uncommon blood type, a distinctive mitochondrial DNA haplotype, linked the victims. A name, a face, a method began to emerge from the chaos. The search intensified. The mountain's silence cracked under the weight of newfound coordination, and the trail of the killer grew sharper, leading investigators toward a destination that would eventually bring the murderer to justice. The sun hung low over the desolate outskirts of Macala when the sound of police radios crackled across the empty streets. March 1990 found Pedro López, 42, seated in the shadowed doorway of a derelict house. His breathing even, the acrid perfume of old cigarettes drifting through cracked windows. The camera lingers on his calm face, a man who had once walked unchallenged through the bustling markets of Quito, now a silent echo in a silent room. The clang of cell doors resounds as officers drag him into a metal cage, the weight of his impending journey to Bogota, a physical pressure against his ribs. As he is transferred across borders and into the hands of an Ecuadorian judge, the image dissolves into the stark white of a courtroom, bathed in daylight, filtered through high windows, an unforgiving transparency that mirrors the society's hunger for forgiving transparency that mirrors the society's hunger for truth. In 1992, the Quito Superior Court becomes a media circus. Reporters' microphones hiss, legal teams shuffle papers in a rhythmic, almost ritualistic dance. The camera holds a medium shot of Lopez's seat, then slowly pans to the witness stand, where a victim's family, their faces bruised by grief, speaks into the silence. A close-up of the judge's gavel striking the desk reverberates through the chamber, the thud a stark punctuation to the storm of testimonies. The courtroom's bright, white light cuts through the dark clouds of fear, illuminating the stark lines of the judge's stern expression. It is a moment of authoritarian solemnity where the public's collective pulse quickens. Justice is poised, yet the underlying terror that has lingered in the town's psyche swells beneath the surface. By 1994, the Ecuadorian court sentences López to death, a verdict that is both a relief for the families and a chilling reminder of the darkness that once walked among them. 4 years later, in 1998, his execution is carried out. The finality of the electric chairs crack a macabre punctuation. Even as the state's iron fist closes around him, the legacy does not die. The public outcry is swift, lawmakers drafting new child protection statutes, and forging cross-border forensic cooperation, a legislative echo of the collective desire to prevent such a nightmare from reemerging. Yet, in the quiet of the town, whispers travel through the corridors of the old prison, a soft murmur of fear that clings to the stone walls. The final image fades to the unsettled silence of the townsfolk, children's laughter, muted, adults speaking in hushed tones about the shadow man who once prowled their streets. The flicker of weak light bulbs in abandoned alleys seems to pulse in sync with the city's heartbeats, a reminder that terror is not simply vanquished by a gavel's crack, but lives in the cracks of memory. As the credits roll, we are left with a paradox. The relief of justice served is counterbalanced by the terror that remains, an unresolved myth, a scar etched into the collective consciousness, and a chilling question that lingers. What darkness will we ever truly extinguish? At dawn, the first rays of sun brush the jagged peaks of the Andes, turning the quiet riverbank near San Andres into a scene of fragile light. The water lags in soft pastel hues, glistening like an open secret as it laps gently against weathered stone. It is here that the body of Pedro López rests, buried beneath the earth, yet still a weight on the collective conscience. The quiet murmurs of the river, the distant echo of chatter that never quite reaches the shore, carry the weight of unanswered questions. Was Pedro truly alone, or did an unseen accomplice walk beside him, leaving footprints only the wind could trace? The patterns etched into the mountain, ancient glyphs, forgotten trails, seem to whisper a different truth, a story buried deep within Andean folklore. Every rusted lock on the abandoned cabins, every cave carved into the rock, stands as a silent sentinel, reminding us that some shadows are never fully erased, even when the body is sealed beneath stone. As the cold wind rises from the high ridges, it carries the scent of pine and old earth, stirring memories that cling to the edges of daylight. The mountain still whispers, its voice a low, rhythmic chant that blends with the river's song. In the hush that follows, one can almost hear the distant lament of those lost, a reminder that the line between myth and reality is thinner than the mist that clings to the peaks. The story of Pedro López ends with a question that lingers in the wind, a chilling echo that the killer's shadow, whether a single man or a mythic force, continues to haunt these silent, soaring heights.